We think this product can actually increase the understanding of the specificity of the mining industry with equity investors, with other banks, with the entire financial community.
And so this is really a key lesson. It's about projects and it's about governance.
It can also generate social value. It promotes sustainable operations among your employees, and it increases shareholder engagement.
Welcome viewers to this very timely discussion on green and sustainability linked finance. This forms part of our suite of video sessions for the one-to-one mining investment online conference. We're going to be hearing insights on a very interesting case study whereby Société Générale concluded a 6-year, $125 million green loan with Polymetal to finance investments in the transition to more sustainable and low emissions operations. I'm delighted to welcome a diverse panel of stakeholders involved in the financing to speak about the developments and how they implemented a green financing framework. I have joining me today, Eugenia Onuschenko, Director of Corporate Finance at Polymetal International. And Polymetal is one of the top 10 producing precious metals and manufacturing companies and is listed in London and Moscow. Bernhard Schiessl, Director and Chief Operating Officer at Cicero Shades of Green. Cicero is the Centre for International Climate Research, the global leading provider of green bond assessments. And Clement de-Givry, Global Head of Mining, Metals and Industries at Société Générale, joins me. So a very warm welcome to you all. Thanks for taking time to speak on this panel. Let's begin by asking some insights to Polymetal. Eugenia, can I turn to you, please, and ask why look at a green loan after 2 sustainably linked loans?
Okay, Adam, thank you so much for your introduction. Let me first start, I'll tell you about the company a little bit. So Polymetal is a top 10 global gold producer and top 5 global silver producer with assets in Russia and Kazakhstan. And importantly, we were recognized as the ESG leader among 60 precious metals company by Sustainalytics. And we were the first mining and the first Russian company to be included in the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And green finance is an important part of our financing strategy because over the last 3 years, we have raised approximately $270 million in sustainability-linked finance for our ESG goals. And this is approximately 20% of our net debt. So, speaking about why sustainability finance, because it's a very good question. It's actually one of my favorite questions because, I receive lots of, after we last time closed deal with Société Générale, and this was already a third sustainability linked instrument in our portfolio, I received a call from one of our sell-side analysts who asked me, why are you doing this? Why is it just for PR purposes? And this is a kind of perception we still get from the market sometimes, which is a surprise for me because I think it's that's why I think it's important to explain what stands behind the decision to attract sustainability financing instead of a corporate loan. So the way we think about it is just, I think it's a proof of company readiness to take real actions, a demonstration of commitment to achieve sustainability goals. It's also a demonstration of corporate governance maturity and transparency. And we have Cicero here who will speak later about the requirements to transparency and reporting for a green loan. I also think what is important is that sustainability-linked finance definitely help you to improve awareness of your ESG strategy, both inside and outside your organization. And at the end, if you do this smart and if you do it at the right moment, you can also achieve longer tenors and better interest rates, based on our experience at least. So, I would say not only sustainability finance can result in creating the shareholder value by optimizing your cost of debt, by strengthening your brand, or it can also generate social value. It promotes sustainable operations among your employees, and it increases shareholder engagement. So I hope this answers your question, why we decided to look at the green loan at the end.
Yes, definitely. Thanks, Eugenia. And we'll come on to some of those other points around some of the shareholder engagement a little bit later on as well. Bernhard, can I turn to you now and just ask about why this might have been an attractive proposition for Cicero to provide a second party opinion on this project, particularly to talk about how you look at a gold mining company with emerging market assets, for instance.
Thank you, Adam. Maybe as to start that off, like as a large external reviewer for green financing and as part of a research institute on climate, we see the necessity that we need to decarbonize and address climate risk within all companies and across all industries, and that includes also mining companies, of course, as well. When we look at the climate risks as a whole, we know that we are reaching more than 400 parts per million, and in terms of emissions, we see that greenhouse gas emissions, about 10% of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions are related to the metal and mining industries. And we see with, for example, two of our clients, Polymetal and LKAB, that there are substantial emissions associated with the mining of these metals. For example, in gold, you have a high intensity per ton mined, while of course there's less in terms of value. LKAB supplies 80% of the market in the EU with iron ore, and is also, of course, these steel mining industry has a lot of coal in their portfolio. So we see a critical need for these mining companies to transition to a lower carbon profile on the one hand, but of course we also see the necessity of these mining products for a low carbon future and a climate resilient future. And that is one reason why we need more green financing in these areas. That is one side of the medal. And the other side is that, of course, we see more and more climate risks emerging globally. Of course, we see more droughts, we see more flooding, sea level rise, and all these climate risks translate, of course, to financial risks that need to be addressed. And of course, there's the physical risk side, but also the transition risk side for investors that they need to be aware of that directly translates. For example, there might be higher carbon pricing in the future that might directly have impacts on the financial risk side. There might be supply chain disruptions. There's a long supply chain in the metal and mining industry as well. And so this is really something that needs to be addressed, and green financing in this industry increases, as was just mentioned, transparency, for example, which is critical for investors. It also addresses some of these climate risks that are screened. One example would be, for example, the TCFD that might be associated with it. We might come to that later as well. It builds capacity with this exercise among investors, but also among issuers. It's a longer exercise, as we probably will hear later as well, that takes effort and that needs to then translate into action in terms of what is going to be financed. Also, of course, I mean, this green financing exercise taps into a completely different and larger investor base that might be helpful for the long-term transition in order to raise the capital we need to transition to a low-carbon future. So that's these two kind of sides in terms of physical risk and climate and transition risks. And in order to achieve as a company these the objectives that we have as a society, there of course are numerous kind of projects, just to kind of name some examples now right at the beginning, where one could start, and that is of course like renewable energy was one of the starting points, something that one thinks of when thinking about green, but of course also clean transportation along the supply chain within the company as well. The production equipment that can be decarbonized, and of course addressing environmental risks that come with mining. That might be a huge issue for investors, and that can be addressed with green financing if managed responsibly. And of course, as mentioned, with the physical risk side, the adaptation to climate change is a vital part. So adaptation and mitigation, ideally from a climate science perspective, goes hand in hand, because you don't want to have one or the other being exposed to these climate risks. So yeah, to wrap that up, I mean, the risks of climate are have to be addressed, but also the environmental and social risks that come with these projects need to be addressed. Like, for example, you have large quantities of waste, which might be an issue for investors as well. And so it needs to be a holistic picture that needs to be implemented, which green financing really opens the door for.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks very much for that rundown and explanation on the dual aspects of this. Stephanie, turning to you now, could you explain a little bit about the importance of promoting positive ESG topics for mining companies and some of the messaging towards investors that you've been aiding with?
Thank you very much, Adam. So as most of you looking at this panel would know, Société Générale is an international banking institution and with dedicated teams to mining, metals and industry finance, having supported the industry for more than 2 decades now. So we have a very long track record and experience in supporting mining companies' project and development through financing. Our long involvement in the industry has led us to take very seriously for many years, and so this is not new, how projects and companies mitigate the negative impact they can have on environmental, climate, social aspects, communities, water, and probably a bit more recently, but already we've been on it for several years, climate as well. So we've had, we are very fortunate because we have dedicated and ENS team within our organization, which have been specialized in working with us on projects since we signed Equator Principle, which is now more than a decade ago. And we have therefore a very high level of understanding of the technical aspects of mining. And when you look at mining, ENS aspects and climate mitigation is heavily linked to the technical aspect of your operation, what you can do, what you cannot do. And it's not necessarily something any institution can take on if you don't have the right technical background. So just all this to say is that we were well equipped to dive into sustainable finance when the SG as an institution started to do sustainable finance for other sectors, starting with renewable and this spread out to a wide range of other sectors. But we were very focused on the what is called in this field the do not harm principle. So mitigation of the negative impact. So what we wanted to achieve, and that's one of the reasons why we took such a quick deep dive into sustainable finance, was also not only to show the mitigation of the negative impact, but also to show the positive impact or the extra mile, let's put it that way, some of our clients we are actually achieving on ESG, which was something, to be honest, I think a bit below the radar, given that the general perception of the mining industry is more like as just a negative impact and end of the discussion. So for us, we jumped on this because we think this product can actually increase the understanding of the specificity of the mining industry with equity investors, with other banks, with the entire financial community at large, even rating agency, which now have their own sustainable extra financial rating agencies. And we believe that it can help the industry rebuild credibility and put a better foot forward in terms of general communication. So we have 2 main products so far that have been developed with Green Label. So we've got the sustainability linked loans and the green loans. We've closed 2 transactions in each category, one in each category with Polymetal, but also in other sectors. Bernhard was mentioning iron ore, so we've just closed a sustainability loan for a large for Metalo Invest, a large Russian iron ore producer. We've also shown that it's possible. It's not only about doing bilateral facility, but we can also raise funding with a syndicate of banks. So the sustainability linked loan is really a corporate loan for that the money can be used for general corporate purposes, even refinancing of existing debt. And some dedicated, tailored KPIs, ESG KPIs are defined with the company, with the bank, which is the coordinator of the sustainable aspects. They are always tailored, and that's where our technical expertise help us to the operation. So they are at the same time credible, ambitious, and achievable. So the idea is that the company will undertake to reach certain improvements on waste, climate, safety, tailing security, name it, something really specific, as you can see, to mining. And if they exceed this loan, there will be, the bank will give a small rebate on the margin, showing, as Eugenia was saying, that there is a direct positive impact on your P&L if you exceed your ESG goal, which is really something, maybe in terms of money, it's a bit symbolic, but in terms of concept, it's quite groundbreaking. For the first time, banks are rewarding clients to exceed their ESG goals. Green loans, and we will come back to that a bit more in detail, are more specialized lending. So they are more CapEx linked for eligible CapEx as defined by the EU taxonomy and vetted by Cicero, and we will go into that again in more detail. So they cannot be used for general corporate purposes or refinancing. They have to be dedicated to a specific CapEx project. In terms of the bank market, like the investor market, is characterized by increased selectivity on and an increased level of awareness that ESG is linked with financial performance, and a good ESG policy also mitigates credit risk. So we can only expect that first, banks are going to have more appetite, and maybe this is what Eugenia was mentioning about getting better terms. So banks will have more appetite for this type of product because they are linked with better performance and lower credit risk. And also, I think it's also a way to differentiate between companies. Some companies at some point, if the ESG, they are not on board of the ESG trend, may just be not investable or not financeable anymore. So I think it's a very important turn for bank finance, and something that needs to be taken into account more broadly by the various mining companies. To finish, I would like to say that it's all fine and I think it's a great ambition to want to enter into a sustainable finance facility. However, not every company are ready. Polymetal clearly was very advanced in its own organization, from the board all the way to the operations. They were very much aware of what the ESG strategy was, the key goals, and they had embedded how to do it in their organization. So we recognize not everybody is at that stage, but we are here to accompany client on their journey if they decide that they want to look into this type of financing, so that they can also get ready, and it is overall a success for everybody.
Excellent. That's a really good rundown of the picture to start us off. Thank you. Let's move on now to more around the how you developed this green financing framework for this particular case study. Stephanie, keeping with you, could I just ask, and you touched on some of the points in your last answer a little bit around some of the criteria that you're advising on to measure, but what powers did SocGen bring to bear in terms of how you developed the process with Polymetal and Cicero?
Yeah. So given that we are in the mining industry, we were a bit paranoid about being not being sufficiently credible as an industry to be able to do a green loan. So we were a bit paranoid on this point, I have to say. So the how started with first we need a client very mature, and Polymetal obviously came to mind. And then we need them to have a plan of capex, because green loan is about financing green capex that whose effect is intended to reduce the carbon footprint of the company. And Polymetal obviously was very advanced in having developed this plan, and I will let Eugenia comment in more detail on the content. We were also acutely aware of the fact that there had been no green loan for mining in an emerging market. So we had also a question about the environment in which the company was operating. So we a green loan is more technically challenging than a sustainability loan. As I explained, sustainability is more corporate style. You define your KPI with your bank. You do not necessarily need a third-party opinion like what is required with green loan, where Cicero is providing a third-party opinion to confirm that the CapEx program is really contributing to a green future through a very specific methodologies that they have developed. So the selection of the second party opinion provider was also critical, because we needed someone at the same time very well recognized. And I think you described Cicero at the beginning of the session. I think they were an extremely credible party whose professionalism and level of demand with the company was not going to be questioned. So that was very important to choose this type of institution to support the entire process. And we also decided to work with them because we know mining is not a wind farm or a solar plant. So we are not immediately green. So we saw the Cicero approach to have shade of greens was particularly suited for a first green loan in an emerging market in the mining industry. And I will let Bernhard explain about his methodology a bit more. But if you look at the second party opinion of Polymetal for this green loan, which is in the public domain, you will see that we have shade of greens for each investment. So the key topic of the how was really how can we maximize credibility, show the good faith of all parties, be demanding with the client and ourselves in terms of what we wanted to achieve. And finally, make sure that this first green loan would pave the way for more green loan in the industry, because it would have been so credible and so well received by the market. Finally, of course, and to Eugenia's point, this needs to be attractive from a financing perspective from the company. And I think they have other alternatives, and we, as a bank, we understand that. So we also agreed to probably push a little bit the envelope on certain of the credit terms, because we were in the context where we wanted this to have an extra benefit for everybody entering into this facility. So this is, and maybe to finalize on the SG organization, I mentioned our dedicated sustainable finance team, our team dedicated to understand our clients' specificities in terms of ESG. And I think it's important to know that we have also trained ourselves for these loans in my group, which is really a front office used to structuring finance for the dedicated industry. So we've been trained by our colleagues who have been at the same time guides, but also an inspiration, I have to say, but also have helped us to increase our level of awareness and technicity. And today, I think we would be able to be very autonomous on a green loan. So there's been also within a Société Générale a transfer of competency so that we can continue to accompany the industry.
Okay. Excellent, very clear there. Thank you, Stephanie. Eugenia, turning back to you now, could you please comment a little bit about how you formed the content of the plan and how you developed it?
Okay. Well, there is no know-how in terms of the green project categories, because for a mining company, these categories derive from the key areas of its sustainable development or from the most material risk to the sector. And they are either environmental, so including climate, waste management, water management, pollution prevention and control, here where tailings management falls into this category, or social, including safety or community development. And these are the areas of our strategic focus, because at the end, we would like to achieve the following targets. So we want to decrease our environmental footprint. We want to improve our energy efficiency. We want to ensure safety of our workspace, and we want to have a stable license to operate. So this is why we chose these project categories for the green loan. Although we decided, for the sake of time, to focus on the environmental part, because inclusion of social projects into the green financing framework would require a separate audit. It would affect timing of our transaction. And then also, based on our experience, and this is very important, in order for the projects to be eligible for green loan or a bond, doesn't matter, they definitely shall be part of the company's overall sustainability strategy and have a positive environmental impact. And as Stephanie mentioned, it's also a very important principle, is a do not harm principle. It's very important. So we were able to attract the loan for a number, a small to medium initiative, because ultimately they fall within the large ESG targets, and such targets, the targets that we used, for example, were decrease emissions intensity by 5% in by 2023, or increase share of renewable energy to 7%, increase share of dry stacking to 15% by 2024. I will not go deeper into details, and I would just recommend to look at the green financing framework or our green loan presentation at our website. But this is the approach that we used.
Thank you. And Bernhard, could I turn back to you and just get a little insight on the methodology that Shades of Green applies? Is this strictly tailored for mining in any particular way?
It's not particularly tailored to mining, actually. Stephanie and Eugenia have already described a little bit the aspects we take into account. What we do is we have our methodology developed, I think, about 5 years ago, derived from the Climate Institute, the climate science that we have from about 80 researchers, to develop a methodology that can be applied across all industries. And have then separated it out, as was described, in light, medium, and dark green, in 3 shades of green. And these shades of green really are to communicate the climate risks that stand behind the specific project category or behind the whole framework as an entirety. So what we look at and what we assess is really the green financing framework that outlines, according to the green loan principle and green bond principles, the 4 key pillars of, as also was described, in what is going to be invested in, how will the proceeds be managed, how will you report eventually. But from the project category side, these light, medium, and dark green really tell a story about how well they are aligned with the low carbon future. So we always take this 2050 perspective. So especially in these industries where it might be a little bit more controversial in terms of climate alignment or environmental alignment, we can directly go to our research experts and derive this information to get to this like shade indication. And dark green really would be something that is low carbon and climate resilient at the same time. So again, this interconnection between both. These are often, as mentioned, renewable energy or clean transportation projects, or projects that are just here to stay, if you will. The light green side would be, for example, significant efficiency improvements, improvements that are still connected to fossil fuels, but that are necessary to take steps towards 2050, but maybe not the final solution. And so there we might see a risk of locking in emissions, for example, where an investment might lead to emissions in the future while actually needing a different technology. And here we're looking at industries, for example, as well, where there are no alternatives sometimes. Like shipping would be an industry, in mining industry as well. There are some solutions where we need alternatives, but they're not viable yet. But we still need to take the steps, as I said earlier. We need all kind of shades of green. We need to take these important steps in the right direction. And there's all kinds of shades of green in the mining industry. There are projects that go towards like darker green side. LKAB had a project, for example, called Hybrid, working on low carbon iron production, zero emission iron production, which, as I mentioned earlier, in the steel industry is quite a challenge. Here we had, for example, electric transportation for Polymetal. That was a project category that is going to the medium dark green kind of area. But all of these still are evaluated along the whole value chain, if you will, because they are part of a bigger kind of industry. That means that decarbonizing one part still needs to take into account that another part might be quite fossil intensive. So that all plays into it. And that is what Stephanie mentioned, like our way of approaching this is a very kind of holistic way that is informed by climate science. But this is only the project category assessment, if you will. The other very important part that we talked about now is the governance part. So what kind of policies does Polymetal here in this case have? So what are the targets? How ambitious are they? How are they in alignment with what we need to achieve from the various climate scenarios? What about the broader do no significant harm criteria? Like how is, for example, cyanide being managed? How well is it aligned with the TCFD? So the disclosure requirements when it comes up to climate risks. What are the reporting policies with regards to, for example, GRI, UN Global Compact? These are just, on the policy section, but then of course also on the framework part, how a project selected, what is the competence within a company in order to assess is something really climate risk aligned, or is something potentially exposed and needs to be deselected, and how eventually will be reported. So what are the requirements there? So these are the kind of the two parts. Like one is the kind of the project categories and the framework in terms of shades of green, and then the governance will be part of a kind of governance score that is tied to the framework. And then, of course, what this leads to is that we make transparent to investors the strength and the pitfalls potentially behind a specific framework. And that can then be discussed very easily, hopefully, between investors and the issuer when it comes up to what can still be improved. And for example, common areas in the mining industry would be that there still might be fossil intensive operations that might be tied to these investments. Diesel generators would be one example in remote areas, or just in general, the metal production and needs a lot of fossil fuels. The waste management could be a potential risk that needs to be highlighted, and the management of the chemicals, that there is no pollution. Broader environmental impacts, of course, in the mining industries is a risk. Disturbance of land, for example, the social impacts that might be, like, for example, resettlement, that could become a risk. And of course, also what I mentioned earlier, the kind of customer mapping, like what are the products being used for? Is that going to be used, for example, in fossil intensive industries right away? Is that the kind of main customer, or is it used for renewable energy production, as we, for example, need silver for photovoltaics and other kind of applications? So this is really kind of the areas where we look where we look into, and where we can then also highlight potential risks that stand behind the investment, and that could then be gradually improved in the future.
Excellent. It's very comprehensive, a very holistic view there. Bernhard, coming back to you, can you comment on the appeal of green credentials across different sectors at the moment, and maybe comment on how industrially focused or brown sectors are looking at green financing solution, or utilizing or developing their green credentials?
So traditionally, I would say there's a large share in the renewable and transportation kind of areas that are easy to understand from a green perspective. And we get this notion that there's now more and more interest across all sectors, and maybe the more dirty sectors as well, if you will, that where companies hear that there will be the demand, there is the pressure, and there is more demand for finding these green projects. And this is kind of our narrative that we tried to shape over the last decade or so. We've been in the green finance space. We need all sectors to decarbonize, right? So we need also to move forward in the industries that are harder to decarbonize, and that might actually be very exposed to the transition risks, but also to the physical risks. So there is this need to do that, and that pressure comes from all sides, from the investor side, from shareholder side, from the society. And so we've had a couple of more cases now in this space, and I think that this is bound to stay. There's this discussion on transition bonds that has emerged from our side. We see transition bonds as one form of green bonds, of course, because our assessment with this light green and medium green, for example, is exactly the transition space. So investments that might not be the final low carbon climate resilient solution, but that are getting us closer to the solution, and have to be significant enough to actually be on that pathway. And so we see this conversation as very welcome. There have been cases that kind of also shape the discussion. So Polymetal is one, TK was one, Altera's shuttle tankers, that's the new name in the oil business, natural gas companies that go into that space. So everybody's trying to move forward and try to find projects, try to shape their governance. And that is something that we welcome. And we now also transitioned to full company transparency, because this whole exercise was a great start to be transparent about green projects. But now we've also looking at the full revenue and investment profile of companies, providing a kind of a shade of green range. So like a company might have 50% in the green space in terms of revenue and investments, and 15% in the non-green space. And this is really something where investors will be able to tell how willing am I as a company to move forward. So where are my investments? Are they more in the green space, or are they still in the kind of non-green space? So this is something that investors will be then able to follow over time and see that the company is actually placing their money where their mouth is, for example. And these kind of company assessments are just taking the next step from being transparent on only the green part to being transparent and saying like, look, we are here. This is our context of our company. We're taking this over and we're moving it towards the 2050 solution. So we're taking a step-by-step approach, and that means we're investing slowly more into this industry that is going to stay, and we're de-investing in our own industry from the things that are like slowly phased out. And then you can kind of, through this transparency, really see what the ambitions are that stand behind it. So this is kind of the next step that we see as being necessary in this kind of green financing space.
Certainly. Stephanie, how are you finding interest in the green and sustainability linked products? This is very much a growing segment of financing?
Well, maybe first of all, I would like to say to remind everybody that large banks like Société Générale or large funds or large asset managers are very diversified, and very often the mining finance part of the activity is quite small. So having gone into this type of instrument with one of your clients, clearly, in a way, is a bit of a game changer in the perception that the entire organization can have of mining. And I think Bernhard put it very well. I think mining is, we don't want it to be perceived as a 19th century industry which has not evolved with its time and doesn't get the importance of ESG standards, raising the standards. And we all know that we had some spectacular ENS failure in this industry in the not too distant past. So there is clearly an effort of showing that first, this industry is not a problem. It can be a solution if they do things right. And I think we all had been very focused on mitigating the do not harm and not probably putting forward sufficiently what can be done in terms of overall contribution to a better society in terms of better ESG standards and lower carbon. So while at the same time, and that's the paradox, mining products are absolutely required for the transformation of the broader society into a lower carbon economy. So I think we manage with this type of loans to change the perception. And I can tell you that when we did this, we've done several transactions now, not probably no more than 5, so it's not a huge number yet. But each one, as you could see from my previous my previous answers to your question, were very carefully thought through, so they would have clearly a positive impact in terms of improving the perception of the mining industry and what mining company can do to be positive contributors. So I would say this has been really the largest impact that we've observed. I had kind of numerous messages on LinkedIn of it's great that mining is going into that direction. People saying, oh, for the first time, mining companies benefit from being good citizens. So I think this link has now been established. And that's, so now what we would like to do, because we've done a couple of underlying minerals, we would like to expand. We think it's necessary to expand to show that each, that's the problem of being a multi-commodity, underlying commodity industry, that each commodity has a little bit its own story. The gold producer will not have the same story as the iron ore producer, which feed, or the bauxite miners, which feed industry with a high level of emissions, where there is a concern about abating the entire value chain emissions. It will be different as well for the so-called battery mineral, which are almost a bit the renewable of the mining sector, if I may put it that way, the lithium, cobalt, etc. So we need to work on building the case for each underlying commodity. And I think we need to be also helping our clients and their investors to streamline the standards we are using, because I think the lack of harmonization of standards and measurement is a daunting challenge for investors and companies alike. So if we can also structure increasingly our product to align on common standards, I think that will also help everybody to not only to raise the awareness, but then also to measure, to compare, which is exactly what is starting to happen now. Now that investors are moving away from pure exclusion investment, like I won't do coal anymore, into preferred investment, like I want to study the company I'm investing in to make sure they are my preferred investment, taking into account the ESG aspects. It means we need to be able to compare and measure apple and apple rather than apple and pears. So I think that these have been the immediate lessons learned from this first loan.
Sorry, I'm muted. I've got about 5 minutes left, and I just wanted to touch on what might be next and look ahead at some of the key lessons from this this project. Eugenia, could I turn to you and ask what's next for you in terms of your ESG strategy or financing and operations?
Well, as I said, we prefer our strategy to be precise and well-defined, and for that reason, we haven't announced our long-term climate targets yet. And this is the area of our main focus this year, and we plan to do it soon. So I'm very proud that we were able to attract the 125 million green loan for a number of our short-term transitional initiatives. So the availability period of this loan is 2 years. And this is because of our, we were very clear with our corporate and sustainability strategy. I think this experience can be easily used by other mining companies. Also, apart from traditional and well-known green projects such as renewable energy or clean transportation, I think that we set the precedent for the sector by including into eligible categories mining-specific projects, such as underground backfilling project and dry stacking. There are a few things I think to take into account, and what we learned, from this is that you need to, sort of advice that I would propose to customize your request for proposal before sending it to lenders. So to have the preliminary project register, the amount of capital expenditures, the tenor that we would like to achieve, and maybe even having a draft of the green financing framework before you approach the lenders. And apart from that, I would propose look not only at the commercial terms of the loan, but at the quality of the ESG expertise, which can be provided by the lenders, because Société Générale really was very helpful for us in this process in helping us to prepare the green financing framework, helping us to negotiate with Cicero, helping us to choose the SPO provider. This I would like to thank you, Stephanie, for this. Also, think in advance on how to apply the proceeds, so they aren't stuck on account in the form of cash deposit, because this is also quite important. That's what we did, and try to achieve longer tenors, in order to align the tenor of your loan with the payback periods. So this was our experience. This was our experience, and I would like to thank both Société Générale and Cicero for their role. We are very happy, and I would say we really invested some time into investigating these questions. And I would say that not all European banks, despite having an ESG expertise, were ready to support a Russian mining company with a long-term financing solution, as well as not all the SPO providers were ready to support a gold mining company. So, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Bernhard, and thank you, Cicero, for your participation in the first green loan in mining industry, gold mining industry globally.
Excellent. Thanks for the rundown there, Eugenia. Bernhard, could I turn to you and just get the view on how this experience could be relevant for other mining companies down the line? I know you already have the other case study of the larger iron ore company, but perhaps maybe in the context of emerging markets or African markets, for instance.
Yeah, sure. The key kind of lesson takeaway from this exercise is really what was so nicely described. We need to do this. We need to address climate risk across all industry and across all continents, and that means in emerging markets as well, and also in the mining industry. There needs to be ambitious steps to address these risks and to take into account the specific context of an issuer. And that means what is necessary to assess as a kind of step, as Eugenia said, like the pipeline, what can we do to improve? What are the key issues we need to address? And how is that in alignment with the global best practices? There will always remain like a responsibility to monitor the own impacts that one has to avoid negative environmental impacts, and to apply global best practices, and to also implement the highest available standards. This is like the governance part. So there is a need for governance to implement these projects, and to create this credibility as well, that we will look at as well. And so this is really a key lesson. It's about projects and it's about governance. What can a company do? And then, well, the key takeaway maybe in this context as well is transparency is, the key element of this. So transparency is rewarded in that context, being transparent about strength, and being transparent about potential pitfalls that will be addressed going forward. And so I can only encourage companies to move in this green finance space, and to expose oneself with this steep learning curve that we all need as a society to address the climate risks we're facing.
Excellent, very clear, and good points there. Stephanie, it seems like a wonderfully harmonized project, but from the feedback we've had today, but could you just talk us through a summary from your side, and also what might be next within SocGen's capabilities within this segment?
Well, I think we see a lot of opportunities to support our clients in their decarbonization strategy, and not only in Russia, but also much more broadly, and with a focus on Africa. We've always been very present in Africa, mainly Francophone Africa, but not only. And I would say that we see a lot of interesting projects, for example, in South Africa, with companies starting to test to have hydrogen truck fleets being retrofitted to use hydrogen, with the hydrogen being produced from renewable power. So we see the possibility to also finance more projects which use new technologies. We see a lot of innovation, I have to say, in the mining industry. And even though banks maybe traditionally have not been so interested in financing specific innovative projects within mining, I think if they are a clear contributor to better ESG standards or lower emissions, there will be an increased motivation from banks, including ESG, to support these projects. Africa has its own challenges, as we all know, but there is also some clear benefit of investing in Africa from an ESG perspective, given the positive impact on development, on local communities, which may be even greater than what you can expect to achieve in a high-income OECD country like Canada or Australia, or even in Russia. So I think there are a lot of positive things that miners in Africa can put forward between innovation, development impact, and my message for the industry is make sure that you are ready to in your operations to take this loan and make them a good tool to support your more broader equity story and broader communication about how you are embedding your ESG targets in your organization. Finance is clearly an area which should not be forgotten.
Excellent. That's a very good point to sum up on. So it's been really great to get all of your insights on this good example of how the industry finance and green loans market is developing. Thank you all very much for your time and contribution to that. And that concludes our panel.
Thank you very
much.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.